First of all, I'd like to thank Governor Amasio and distinguished guests for this opportunity for all of us to have this dialogue. It's very timely, and the IMF appreciates your continued engagement on this important subject. I speak after a governor who has experience, and I don't know what else is left to say at this point, but I prepared the slides and I have to go through them to fulfill my time and slot. If you miss anything that I'll say in this presentation, I think the key takeaway for us is that after the recovery becomes well entrenched, policies will need to transition, of course, to supporting growth. In this regard, governance and institutional reforms, if decisively implemented, could define the path for the economic recovery. And so we are of the view that success of the reforms will be contingent on appropriate balance between the NBM's independence and accountability. It has already been said that the crisis has had very deep scars and that recovery will be difficult. Indeed, we have seen activity being stifled. The budget deficit has widened and inflation has fallen below its range. There has been a good reaction from the central bank alongside the fiscal authorities. But what we want to say in this presentation is that after the recovery becomes well entrenched, there will be a need for us to bridge into a post-pandemic recovery. And what we see as priorities for the central bank include things which we have already indicated in our interactions and proposals for the program. And so, in our view, what will be important as we go forward is governance and institutional reforms that could shape how quickly the country is going to come back to the recovery. And our approach to this issue leads to key 7 areas that we interact with under the program. These are the corruption, rule of law, regulatory framework, fiscal governance, financial sector oversight, central bank independence, and AML-CFT issues. As you can see from the diagram that I've shared, the 3 areas that are important in this particular framework all relate into the responsibility of the central bank. And let me talk to these 3 areas. The first one is, of course, central bank independence, and a lot has already been said by the governor. In our assessment, we have established that governance arrangements remain broadly appropriate for the case of Moldova, but more recently, they have been exposed to political pressures. There has been significant progress, as already indicated, which has been made jointly with the Moldovan authorities starting from 2014. The key safeguards in the legal system have been strengthened. However, we see the NBM continuously being subjected to political attempts to weaken its autonomy, and these have been done by both the legislature as well as the executive at some times. Now, this coupled with increased scrutiny of its professionals and all their prudent decisions, and of course, a slew of investigations are problematic in our case. In the area of AML-CFT, what we have observed is that broadly, there is a strong framework in place, and the authorities have indeed been addressing these vulnerabilities. And the NBM has also gone ahead to implement some risk-based supervision in the sector. However, we noticed that banks still show some recurring deficiencies, especially in the areas of identification of politically exposed persons, the sanctioning of violations, which appears to be lenient, and where we see also more application of fees and sentences as opposed to other sanctioning measures. We have seen a general failure, of course, in the identification of beneficial owners and sometimes lack of transaction monitoring. In the area of financial sector oversight, we have seen issues to do with significant vulnerabilities built up, especially in the non-bank. And now that the central bank is also going to assume some responsibilities, we see that this area also warrants some kind of attention. So given this background, we have priorities that we see will shape the dialogue going forward, and I'll conclude by looking at these priorities. So the first one, in terms of central bank independence, what we believe is that having a fully instituted management of the central bank, which is instituted in line with professional and integrity and procedural requirements, is critical. Also, there is a need to grant legal protection to NBM officials. As you know, lack of protection when carrying out this mandate means that these individuals are personally exposed, and this cannot serve for them to undermine the achievements on the policy front. Most importantly, we are not arguing for immunity of the officials from responsibility, but would rather that staff are given adequate protection against the political overtures. Also important in this area is to fortify the integrity and finality of monetary policy decisions. And of course, this would involve amending several laws. And we are working closely with the NBM on this. And more generally, just to strengthen the institutional autonomy. In terms of the financial oversight, as the governor has already said, there is a strong need to safeguard the hard-earned gains which have already been achieved in the last few years. Beyond this point, there's also a need to amend, to make sure that the laws are amended to protect the use of professional and risk-based judgment by the NBM. Of course, there could be an issue with corporate governance in banks, which needs to be implemented. But most importantly, we also think there is an urgent need to reduce regulatory arbitrage and strengthen supervision by transferring some of the regulatory and supervisory responsibilities for the oversight of the non-bank sector to the NBM. This will leverage on their expertise, but most importantly, ensure that they make a meaningful contribution to development as the country progresses in the post-pandemic era. And in the areas of AML-CFT, what we see as the priorities include to strengthen intra-institutional coordination and cooperation, improve standards, with particular to politically exposed persons, and lastly, to increase the magnitude of sanctions, especially for AML-CFT violations. And as I conclude, what we see as a way forward is that there is need for an appropriate balance between the NBM's independence and accountability. The NBM should be allowed to execute all its functions without political or prior approval. And in our view, institutional independence is equally critical in such that there should be no interference from third parties, and that includes the parliament, the executive arm, as well as the courts. We also would advocate for personal independence of the officials at the NBM, so to ensure that most of the staff and management are able to facilitate the public policy objectives. And lastly, ensuring financial independence is also equally important. There's need to make sure that no efforts are made to undermine the balance sheet, as well as the adequate buffers the central bank has, so that there is no excuse for the central bank to pursue its mandate in a sound and efficient manner. And as I close, again, I want to join the governor in thanking everyone for this opportunity. And I hope that this continued dialogue will help us to reinforce the reforms that have been studied and obviously put the central bank on the forefront of its objective, which is price stability. Thank you so much for your attention.